Hello, my name is Carter Wilson, and I am a senior in the class of 2024. And today I am going to be giving you a verbal lesson or recounting and summation of certain themes and ideas from units 3 and 4 of the AP exam for the 2024 AP Latin test. So first off, we're going to begin with Virgil. We're reading the Aeneid, and our sections for Unit 3 are from Book 2. So it's a little confusing because it's Unit 3, book is Virgil, except the sections specifically are from Book 2, but it's for Unit 3. Okay, just had to establish that. All right, so Book 2. Our first section is lines 40 through 56. And to give you a brief recount of what's happening is the priestess Laocoon doubts the sincerity of the Greek Trojan horse gift that they present at the Trojan gates. And so Laocoon throws a spear into the body of the wooden horse, and a moan is heard echoing that leads Laocoon to believe that the horse is a scam. So he warns people not to go near the horse or to let it in the city because it's a scam. But we all know eventually that despite his warning, the Trojans will take the Greek horse into their gates, sparking the fall of Troy. But so when looking at this through the realm or the lens of war and empire, we can take away that the Trojans and the Greeks are at war, right? So brief history: Helen, the daughter of the Greek king Menelaus, was taken by Paris, the son of the Trojan king Priam. Okay, and Aeneas, in relation to all of this, is Priam's nephew. So why is this important? Well, it's important to the context of the Roman people because Trojans are shown as accepting gifts and adhering to traditions. Well, since the Trojan horse is ultimately presented as a peace offering or a ceasefire, their acceptance and adherence to tradition, or what could also be seen as arrogance, is ultimately used against them. At the same time, though, this portrays the Greeks as tricksters or cheats. So a little bit of comprehension on this is that Laocoon doubting the sincerity of the Greek horse is just adds to the tragic or dramatic aspect of the story, because even though he doubts it, the Trojans will eventually still let the horse in. So contextualization, honestly, the horse can be seen as a symbol for the fall of Troy and shedding of the qualities such as pride or arrogance that the Trojans were then punished for and killed for because of their reception of the horse. So this section of the text is riddled with the theme of conflict and war, as well as the literary device of hubris with regard to the Trojan blunder of accepting the Greek evil into their city. All right. So the next section of the Aeneid that the Unit 3 of the AP will focus on is Book 2, lines 201 to 249. So essentially, in this section, we're going to see the fallout of Laocoon's observation and warning for the Trojans, and we're going to see how they choose to ignore his call based off a few reasons and his essential punishment for responding or for advising the Trojans not to accept the gift. So to recount exactly what happens is serpents emerge from the sea, and they violently kill Laocoon and his sons, which essentially seals the Trojan fate, as there's nobody questioning whether or not the Greeks are sincere with the gift anymore. And so nothing prevents the Greeks or the Trojans from taking in the horse at this point. So immediately, right off the bat, we see human beings and the gods, because we know serpents themselves aren't real. or in the context of giant serpents that target one person and tear them apart. So we can infer, and we also know by reading the text, that Poseidon, as they emerge from the sea, since Poseidon's on the side of the Greeks, had sent the serpents to kill Laocoon, which did two things. First, it ended Laocoon's questioning of whether or not the Greeks were sincere, and it removed him from planting the question of their sincerity in the Trojan people's minds. And it also, within the Trojan people's minds, sealed the fact that, hey, we shouldn't mess with a gift, right? Because look at Laocoon, that guy died, and he was questioning it. So clearly, it can't be a good thing to question it. We should take it in. So they take it in, unknowingly setting up the Greek takeover, and they celebrate, following the taking in of the horse. So they ultimately fall victim to the deceit of the Greeks, and it eventually just carries along Troy's ultimate downfall. So one thing I did forget to mention in the prior section of lines 201 to 249, there's also the divine aspect of the fact that the snakes waited at the statue of Athena at her feet after they dismembered Laocoon and his sons, which plays a role in the theme of human beings and their relationship with the gods. So now the next section we focus on is still from book 2, but it's now lines 268 to 297. So in this section, we're going to explore the war a little bit more. So really through the lens of a historical perspective through the Aeneid itself. So war is thoroughly depicted. Troy's downfall begins violently as the Greeks emerge under the cover of night from the horse. Specifically, all the Trojans are drunk from their celebration, and they're able to kill off watchmen and let more Greeks into the city of Troy. And so it holds particular significance within the Aeneid storyline as Troy's end ushers in the eventual Roman supremacy. So when looking at the Aeneid through the interpretive lens of propaganda or understanding propaganda, one can see how the chaotic nature of this section of the text specifically serves to almost unify the Roman people as they can connect over the tragic end of their distant ancestors. It gives them a character to root for, Aeneas, as he emerges from the horrible consequences of his own people's actions. Aeneas witnesses Hector's call in this section, and he scrambles to retrieve the household gods before he flees. So another jump out at you theme or message or underlying thing in this unit, or in this specific reading, is that the weight that is placed on Aeneas's retrieval of the household gods, so much so to the point that Hector appears to him in a dream, in order to emphasize that he go collect the gods. So, I mean, in this section, it's really meant to add dramatic effect, or at least that's my interpretation. But it's just a motivation to Aeneas to flee his impending doom and to bring with him the household gods. They describe Hector vividly, um, and so it's really just adds to the dramatic effect and pulls the reader in to sympathize with the Trojans as the Greeks ravaged them. So now we approach the last section of the Unit 3 Aeneid collection for the AP test. And so we're going to be focusing on Book 2, Book 2, lines 559 through 620. And honestly, in this section, it really just focuses on how Priam, the king of Troy, is dead. Aeneas is now alone in the wreck of his city. He sees Helen and acknowledges her as the proponent of the war, so he blames her. And so he then reflects and weighs on the notion of killing her. So for history, Helen was found by Aeneas cowering in the temple of Vesta. So there's a certain religious and cultural weight of her taking sanctuary in the temple. So ultimately, he avoids choosing revenge and doesn't kill Helen. But it's really portrayed how hard it is for Aeneas to do so in this moment, just because, look, his whole city is gone, family is mostly gone, people, men are gone. So he's lost almost everything. And he sees Helen, who is somebody he can point a finger at and say, "Hey, this is your fault." But he still he doesn't kill her. And so ultimately, this I think can be analyzed as another propaganda point, in that since Aeneas can be seen by this hero by the Romans who are meant to read the Aeneid, I think it kind of shows the value of pagan religion and customs that were associated with it at the people at the time, and also the values that Romans held at their core, like respect and honesty. Because in the same way that the Greeks were deceitful and lied to the Trojans and were like, "Hey, okay, peace. Here's this peace offering of the horse." The Trojans respected the custom and took the peace offering. They did the quote unquote right thing, right cultural thing. They took it and look, in return, they got ravaged. Yet in this moment, the Trojans, who would almost have every right to exact revenge, specifically Aeneas, almost every right to exact revenge, everything's been stripped from him. He sees Helen, and she's hiding in the near the hearth in the temple of Vesta. She's taking refuge, so it's a sacred cultural aspect that you can't mess with her because she's taking refuge. But Aeneas struggles with this, and that he's like, "Wow, everything's been taken from me. I want to kill her." But the values that he holds that are meant to propaganda or communicate to the Roman people is that he's honest and he's true. And so it paints the Trojans as people of high value. They were deceived by the gift, but Aeneas rose above his feelings of anger and ultimately spares Helen. So it even more paints the Greeks as people who are willing to stoop down to such a level of disrespect, but it uplifts the Trojans as great people, further establishing the Romans as people who have higher values and morals, since of course they're descended from them. So now we will shift to Unit 4 of the AP Latin exam, which pertains to Caesar now. So we're in the Caesar book, and we're focusing on chapter 4 of Caesar's De Bello Gallico. Okay. And so basically what's outlined is that it's all of chapters 24 through 35 within book 4. So it's just basically a long, tedious history lesson. And then in addition, there is book 4, chapter 36, but only the first sentence. So I will be going over that as well. So it's a lot of reading and a lot goes on, but I will do my best to summarize it to the key important points and break down Caesar's leadership. So it immediately begins with Caesar leaving on a military campaign to Britain, where first most he encounters significant challenge in the face of navigation, where because the Roman navy, the size and scale of it, of the ships in the fleet, it's so massive that it's hard to navigate in this foreign territory where there's rocky shores and shallow water and frequent storms. So he faces difficulty navigating in that aspect. Additionally, the Britons have unfamiliar fighting techniques that make the entire campaign more difficult for Caesar to control. I think it's a observation you can make that a lot of the circumstance or almost war stories told by Caesar in De Bello Gallico as a whole kind of start off as, "Hey, there was this challenge, it set me back, but here's how I overcame it." And I don't think that this Britain section is any different in that sense, in that he really highlights his own ability, which for obvious reasons, I mean, it's basically him bragging, right? He highlights his own abilities through that way, introducing a problem. Who knows if it's exaggerated or to what degree it's exaggerated, but it's what's written. So he faces the difficulty that they have unfamiliar fighting techniques. And so eventually time passes and Caesar makes peace with them, the Britons. But eventually it falls through the grapevine or the chain of command that the Britons might not be totally truthful to the peace agreement and they might be plotting something. So this greatly troubles Caesar. And so additionally, the Romans are running short on supplies, so they send out foraging parties, and the Britons then ambush one of these legions who were foraging. So Caesar and the Romans, they struggled to manage the Britons because they used chariots and horses in a fighting technique that the Romans hadn't really encountered before. So they took advantage of horses' natural size and strength, and they took advantage of the structure of a chariot, as well as like the ranged ability that being on a chariot would give them. And they were able to limit their casualties but maximize impact by using this chariot strategy. And so at first, this is that challenge that Caesar always describes a challenge, and then how he overcame it. Well, this is the challenge right here: is that their malicious horse chariot drawn attack strategy against the Romans is hard to manage and hard for the Romans to overcome, just because of how new and intelligent it was, and they had never seen it. So Caesar then helped bring back order to his troops, and it perfectly lined up that storms interrupted the fighting, which it's hard to tell if that's seen as positive in his eyes, but I infer that that's a positive thing because it allows him more time to regroup. But at the same time, it also allows the Britons to regroup and mount an attack on the Romans. But this time, this is Caesar's great triumph. This time, the chariot battle technique that they employed did not overcome the experience and the scale of the Roman forces and their discipline. So Caesar then saw to it that the Britons might try to escape. So he pushed his forces to chase them and inflicted many casualties upon them. And then, following this great triumph that had finally come after the challenge they had faced, Caesar had then ordered all of his people to destroy and burn the area before they returned to their camp. So this really highlights how there's a challenge and then he overcomes it, and he may or may not exaggerate, but he presents a challenge, overcomes it, and that speaks to his effectiveness as a leader. So what I notice and what I think that's generally noticeable in this section is the tradition aspect is there, and that he shows that Romans value tradition and like bringing their whole navy and their whole fleet to this area. And but they also adapt in that they forage around the area, they set up camp in a new way, they adapt to the chariot attack of the Britons that they hadn't previously seen before. And so additionally, it really shows how disciplined his troops were and that they were able to rally so quickly against this. And it shows his success as a leader when he predicted the escape or the attempted escape of the Britons. And it just shows them how he's willing to punish those who challenge his authority so heavily. So he inflicts them with casualties. He chases them even as they're trying to run away. It's like shooting at people whose backs are towards you, basically. So it really just displays the brutality and the power of Rome and his forces behind him, and his ability to command troops to the degree that he could totally conquer completely foreign areas. It's kind of reminiscent of Napoleon up until the point he got to Russia. So then in the first sentence of chapter 36, also in book 4, what happens? Well, it's kind of funny. The Britons immediately send ambassadors to negotiate peace. So this seals the deal that Caesar won, but also leads you to believe that there might have been a little bit of exaggeration there. The same day that they just had a ton of casualties inflicted, and were chased back by Caesar, that they would be sending ambassadors might be hard to believe, knowing other historical similar battles and how long it takes for peace to be sorted out. But it's said that the Britons immediately sent ambassadors to negotiate peace, and further reading that's not included in the final sentence or the first sentence will tell you that Caesar punishes them heavily as a result of their backtrack on the previously agreed peace. He does this by requesting double amount of captured soldiers that would have otherwise been expected to have requested. So he really just shows how, hey, you don't mess with us. He inserts his whole character and his strength, and he doesn't back down. That's essentially what most of the De Bello Gallico focuses on, is just how persistent he is and how he will always get his triumph. So it essentially shows how effective his prior actions all were. Pushing through weather and foreign land showed the power of the Romans. Romans don't lose, and Romans punish those who disrespect Rome. So thank you guys for listening to my breakdown of Unit 3 and 4 of the AP Latin test, or the AP Latin curriculum. And I hope that it helps you when you're trying to understand what happens, or at least the English context of the translated into English context of what happens as you approach learning the Latin and getting familiar with it. So thank you.